Welcome to this explainer. I'm putting on my geopolitical analyst hat today because we absolutely need to talk about the fragile, newly announced ceasefire agreement between the United States and Iran. We are looking at a 60-day sprint, literally a race against the clock, to prevent a massive regional catastrophe. And trust me, there is a whole lot of nuance hiding just beneath the headlines. So let's just dive right in. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll cover the 60-day peace window, unlocking the Strait of Hormuz, competing claims of victory, the Lebanon ceasefire challenge, verifying the nuclear rollback, and finally, the landmines on the path.
All right, part one, the 60-day peace window.
So here's the critical path we're walking right now. Back on June 15th, we actually saw the initial digital signatures on a memorandum of understanding by both U.S. and Iranian leadership. Next up is the formal, in-person signing ceremony in Geneva on June 19th. But here is the date you really need to circle on your calendar, mid-August. That is the fast-approaching 60-day deadline to hammer out a final, comprehensive nuclear and sanctions agreement. So this initial agreement, it's not the finish line. Not even close. It's the starting gun for an incredibly tense, high-stakes negotiation period. The clock is officially ticking.
Moving on to part two, unlocking the Strait of Hormuz.
While all the diplomacy is happening over in Geneva, the immediate, massive impact of this deal is being felt across global markets in real time. Literally, the moment this framework was announced, U.S. crude oil prices took a sudden 4.8% dive, settling at roughly $80 a barrel. And that makes total sense, right? For months, the entire global economy has been sweating bullets over the prospect of a prolonged fuel and fertilizer shock because of these naval blockades. So the promise of toll-free, open navigation through the Strait of Hormuz is exactly the kind of relief international markets were desperate to hear.
But we have to ask the practical question here. How fast can shipping truly get back to normal? Because you can't just flip a switch. Right now, there are over 500 ships stranded in the Gulf. It's a massive maritime traffic jam. And authorities are warning that removing sea mines and safely organizing that traffic is going to take months of really careful, organized work. If all those ships just rush the strait at once, we're looking at catastrophic collisions. So the takeaway here is that while the political blockade might be lifting, the reality of commercial shipping is going to require a very slow and organized approach.
Section 3. Competing Claims of Victory.
It's fascinating because in any conflict, the battle over the narrative is often just as intense as the battle on the ground. Both sides right now are heavily selling this pause in the 100-day war as a definitive win to their people. If we look impartially at these conflicting perspectives, we see two completely divergent realities. On one side, Israeli leadership is claiming this war averted nuclear annihilation and severely degraded Hezbollah. On the other side, Iranian leadership is framing the exact same event as a historic resistance. They're claiming they forced the United States to respect Iranian sovereignty and that they are the ones emerging victorious. But if you look past the victory parades, there's some very real, deep-seated skepticism, especially in Tehran. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi actually hit the nail on the head regarding this sentiment. He recently said, "We have seen agreements go unimplemented, and we have seen agreements torn up." He's referring, of course, to the total collapse of the 2015 JCPOA nuclear deal when the U.S. withdrew in 2018. That history casts a long shadow. It breeds profound domestic skepticism in Iran about whether they can actually rely on U.S. commitments. And because of that, Iranian negotiators are walking into the 60-day window demanding concrete, upfront benefits.
All right, Section 4, the Lebanon ceasefire challenge.
Because while the global markets are breathing a huge sigh of relief over the maritime situation, there is some severe, localized friction in the Levant that threatens to literally tear this whole framework apart. Let's look at the actual facts on the ground. Iran considers peace in Lebanon to be an inseparable part of this deal. They want a complete and immediate halt to Israeli actions. However, Israeli officials are absolutely adamant that they will not withdraw their forces from security zones up to the Litani River. Meanwhile, we are still seeing Israeli drone strikes in places like Beirut and Nabatea. And to make things even more complicated, senior U.S. officials are stepping in to say that, technically speaking, Lebanon falls completely outside the direct scope of this memorandum of understanding.
So that brings us to a massive contradiction. How do you realistically enforce a ceasefire in Lebanon when Israeli troops are still literally on the ground? This unresolved tension resulted in fresh Israeli strikes in Beirut just hours before the ceasefire was even announced. As you can imagine, that sparked absolute outrage from Tehran and, honestly, from Washington too.
Section 5. Verifying the nuclear rollback.
Lebanon might be the immediate spark, but the absolute core requirement to achieve any sort of lasting peace within this 60-day window, that's buried deep underground in Iran.
For Iran to secure access to the global economy, they have to jump through several massive hoops. First, a firm commitment to never procure nuclear weapons. Second, they have to agree on the exact mechanisms to destroy their current stockpiles of highly enriched uranium. Third, there has to be a rigorous, bulletproof verification process, likely involving the UN's atomic agency. And fourth, all of this compliance has to be strictly tied to phased U.S. sanctions relief. It's an incredibly high-stakes, multi-step dance.
Finally, Section 6. Landmines on the path.
As an analyst, evaluating the viability of this deal doesn't just mean looking at a signed piece of paper. It means identifying exactly what could cause the whole thing to collapse. We're looking at some massive geopolitical hurdles here. The enforcement of the Lebanon ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, that carries a severe and immediate risk of reigniting the entire conflict, just given the sheer military realities on the ground. Then you have nuclear stockpile verification. That is a high risk simply because there is zero trust between Iran, the US, and UN inspectors. And finally, domestic political pressure is high across the board. Prime Minister Netanyahu is facing intense heat at home, and skeptics in Tehran are highly doubting US resolve. And if you want a perfect example of just how fragile this truce really is, listen to this quote. Right after the Israeli strike on Beirut nearly derailed the entire announcement, President Trump expressed some very intense frustration with Prime Minister Netanyahu. He bluntly told the press, "He has no judgment, I let him know that." This kind of severe friction, even between historically close allies, just goes to show you how easily a single rogue military action could shatter 2 months of delicate diplomacy.
Which leaves us staring down one incredibly vital question. Is this agreement the definitive end to a 100-day war, or is it merely a 60-day pause before a much larger regional explosion? As the clock ticks down toward that mid-August deadline, the actions taken in the waters of the Strait of Hormuz, the skies over Lebanon, and the nuclear facilities in Iran won't just decide the fate of this one agreement. They are going to dictate the geopolitical future of the entire Middle East. What do you think the breaking point is going to be? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep your eyes on that 60-day clock.